Uh, and actually, do any of you have it? That link? Okay. Charlotte, make Joe a co-host, and then Joe, if you could share your screen, that way.
I don't have it on my screen. It's on my phone.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay. All right, because it would be better if people actually could see it, but anyway, so here is the poem. It's another poem by Yehuda Amichai called "My Father Was God," which is a puzzling title, but as we look at the actual poem, it's less puzzling. And I will confess. So first of all, in classical rabbinic times, rabbis only gave 2 sermons a year. One was on Shabbat Shuva, the Shabbat between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, today, and one was on Shabbat HaGadol, which is Shabbat during Pesach. I would be willing to go back to that, actually. But the truth of the matter is that here's confession time. Confession is good for the soul. I did not finish my second sermon for Yom Kippur until 2 o'clock yesterday afternoon. I hope that won't be obvious when I give it on Yom Kippur. I still think it won't be, but whatever. So I did, knowing that was going to be the case, I decided to look for something that I could teach today rather than writing yet another sermon. Okay, and I love Yehuda Amichai. I mean, I think his poetry is so rich. So I, thank God for Google, right? But I, try to find a poem that's appropriate for Yom Kippur, and this is one of the ones that came up. But it's also, I think, appropriate for today's parasha, because I read in the parasha, Sha'al avicha v'yaged. Ask your father and he will tell you. Right? That is to say that in the parsha, it says, he's talking into the future, and like the generation that was at Mount Sinai, right? They keep the commandments. I mean, in theory. But because they were there at Sinai, right? But in future generations, nothing, right? So but ask your father and he will tell you, Zekanecha b'yom ruach, your elders and they will tell you. So let me read this poem, okay? My father was God and did not know it. He gave me the 10 commandments, neither in thunder nor in fury, neither in fire nor in cloud, but in gentleness and in love. He added caresses and added kind words, adding, I beg you, and please. He sang keep and remember in a single melody, and he pleaded and cried quietly between one commandment and the next. Don't take your God's name in vain. Don't take it, not in vain. I beg you. Don't bear false witness against your neighbor. He hugged me tightly and whispered in my ear, don't steal, don't commit adultery, don't murder. And he put the palms of his open hands on my head with the Yom Kippur blessing, honor, love, in order that your days might be long on the earth. And my father's voice was white like the hair on his head. Later, he turned his face to me one last time, like on the day he died in my arms, and said, I want to add two to the 10 commandments. The 11th commandment, don't change. The 12th commandment, you must surely change. So said my father, and then he turned from me and went off, disappearing into his strange distances. All right, so I just one thing when he said, he sang keep and remember in a single melody, right? It's in Lahadavi Shamor V'Zachor B'Dibur Echad, right? And what is that all about? If you look at the two versions of the 10 Commandments, right, which should be identical, because after all, Moses in Deuteronomy is just retelling what happened 40 years earlier, right? But in Exodus it says Zachor et Yom HaShabbat L'Kodsho, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. And in Deuteronomy it says Shamor et Yom HaShabbat L'Kodsho, right? Keep the Sabbath day to keep it holy. And how can it be that, like, one of them must be wrong, right? But it can't be wrong because the Torah came from God and Moses wouldn't mess it up, right? So how do we resolve it? Shamor v'Zachor b'Dibur Echad, right? That God somehow said Shamor and Zachor at the same time, because divine speech is not the same as human speech, right? And you can't say two words simultaneously, but God, okay, but thoughts on this poem, right? My father was God and did not know it. What is that saying? Anyone?
He carried God's word forward.
He carried God's word forward, same one. I mean, what do you mean by that?
Well, anyway, all that God had given the 10 commandments and had provided his children.
All right, he emulated and provided it to his children, right? I mean, it's anybody else? I mean, to me, it's like, and remember Amichai's story, right? Amichai grew up he grew up Orthodox, he grew up observant, right? But he became known as a secular poet. And as I said, the poet of either a poet of anger at God or a poet even of the absence of God, right? Because he was born in Germany in 24, and his family moved to Israel in 36, when it was still possible for some people to get out of Germany, right? He was not Yehuda Amichai as a kid in Germany. He was Ludwig Pfeffer, but, he adopted the name Amichai, which means my people live, probably after the Holocaust. But a lot of his poems, in a way, are Holocaust poems, but not as directly as some other poets. But he also, he fought in the 48 war, he fought in the 56 war, and he has a lot of poetry about, the pain and the suffering of those wars as well, and if you asked him, right, I think he would say, like I said on the second day of Rosh Hashanah, that after the Holocaust, it's not possible for him to believe in God, at least not in the traditional way, right? But still very Jewish, right? And still, deeply enmeshed in Jewish things and not simple. I mean, knows the Bible backwards and forwards, but also knows rabbinic literature backwards and forwards, right? Like, unlike a lot of Israelis who may know the Bible but don't know anything later than that, right? He knows, for example, to quote Shamor v'sapor v'dibur echad, which is from the 1500s, right? So, to me, when he says, my father was God and did not know it, that his Jewish identity comes not from God, right, but from his father, right? Which, is, I think, true of a lot of us, right? I mean, it's obviously not true of everybody. I mean, if you are a convert, then you obviously don't get your Jewish identity from your parents, right? But for me, I mean, in retrospect, if I had to say, who was the most important Jewish influence in my life, it was my dad. I mean, there's no question about it. I mean, even though both of my parents were born Jews, if it was up to my mom, all right, so here's a preview of not the sermon I finished at 2:00, but the other sermon. Okay, what percent, all right, so this figure is from 2019, okay, so it may be somewhat inaccurate. What percentage of Jewish kids in the greater Washington area ever get any formal Jewish education at any point before age 18? Okay, meaning Hebrew school, day school, whatever, okay? What percentage? 20? 25? 15? Wow, you guys are even less.
I'm thinking like 35.
Okay, you guys are more pessimistic than the actual, well, so the actual data is about 42%. Okay, so 58% of Jewish kids in the greater Washington greater Washington area receive no formal Jewish education whatsoever. Now, I quote that because if it was up to my mom, I would have been in that 58%, right? It was my dad who insisted that, we belong to a shul, go to Hebrew school, get a bar mitzvah, et cetera, right? But if you look, and I realize that those of you on Zoom may not have the text, right? Those of you who are here, look at the commandments that he quotes, right? I mean, what is in common? He doesn't quote all 10 commandments. Right. I mean, basically, the commandments that he quotes are about moral behavior, right? What? How to be a man, right? He doesn't have his father quoting, believe in God, right? I mean, it is don't take God's name in vain, right? But he doesn't, there's no believe in God, there's no Shabbos, etc. Right? It's all about menschlichkeit, right? And so it's all about, let's say, Jewish values, right? And I think he's saying, I got these not from God, but from my dad. I got my Jewish meaning, because he was a very Jewish poet, even if he wasn't a religious poet. I got that from my dad, right? So my father was God and did not know, right? My father was God and did not know it. To me, really, I don't know, that's really strong, right? But I also want to look, so, he's talking about the Ten Commandments, and then towards the end of his father's life, he says his father added to turn to me and said, I want to add two to the Ten Commandments. Okay? The 11th commandment, don't change. The 12th commandment, you must surely change. Right? Now, you could say, well, by then his father was senile, maybe, right? Because then he says, so said my father, and then he turned from me and went off, disappearing into his strange distance, right? So his father maybe was senile, or maybe his father had, PTSD. I mean, presumably, right, if he brought his family from Germany to Eretz Israel in 36, maybe all of his family was wiped out in the Shoah, and so he had, survivors. We don't know. I don't know that much about, the biographical data of Mr. Pfeffer Sr., right? But the 11th commandment, don't change. The 12th commandment, you must surely change. Okay, so it's assuming that he's not senile, that meant something. And again, to me, and I recognize that, I live in this stuff in a way that most of you don't, okay? But it reminds me of something that is kind of uniquely what we claim to stand for in conservative Judaism, right? Michael, you're shaking your head.
Which is keep the tradition but evolve at the same time. Right,
keep the tradition but evolve at the same time, right? I mean, like if the unofficial motto, right? Like Orthodoxy has an unofficial motto, Torah and Mitzvot, right? And Reform has an unofficial motto, Tikkun Olam, right? What's our unofficial motto? Tradition and change, right? Tradition and change. And this to me seems exactly like that. Tradition and change, right? Tradition, don't change. Right? The 11th commandment, don't change. The 12th commandment, you must surely change. Okay, and by the way, if you look at Hebrews, it's written in biblical Hebrew. I'll read these lines. Hadiber ha'echad asar lo tishtane. Right? That sounds like lo tirtzach, lo tigno, right? V'hadiber hasnem asar tishtane. You must surely change. Right? Again, all right, so I'm going to claim Yehuda Amichai as a conservative, right? But I think there's a deeper wisdom than just movement pride, right? I mean, every movement claims Maimonides, every movement claims Moses Mendelssohn. I don't think the Orthodox claim Yehuda Amichai. I'm going to claim him for us, but what is the,
It should be something else to me. It kind of seems like you're a good person, follow up, all these ethical things. So don't change in that respect. You are, but things will change. And so you must surely change along with things, but keep all of what you are. Like basically as things change, it will change, but you are who you are and don't change that. And learn all the proper follow.
right. I mean, I don't think, I
know the world around us won't need to change.
right, okay, I guess, yeah, so don't change, like, interior, right? Like who you are, right? Live these values that I've passed on to you, right? And don't change that. But we live in a changing world, right? And you must, in that sense, you must surely change, right? And I think I mean, look at, okay, so Amichai died in 2000, right? Look how different the world is today than it was in 2000. Okay. Before the World Trade Center, what? Well, I mean, think of, think of the challenges that we as Jews face in terms of like how different the world is that today than it was in 2000. I mean, there are, for some of you that may be like not really like the heart of what you're about, like can you count people in the million on two? Right, I'm sure that, there are lots of people who say, who cares, right? I mean, first of all, you have to care about a million, and then you have to care about what means, a gathering of 10 people, and for a lot of people but, what does it mean to be alive? Right? What does it mean to be alive? I mean, like, let's imagine, it can't happen right now, but I think it's not too far off. Your consciousness is transplanted from your brain to a computer chip, right? And then you don't need your body anymore, right? Is that computer chip now you? Right? Are you, what?
Our consciousness is our body.
Okay, so if your consciousness is now in a computer chip and your body's in the ground, is that chip now you? I don't know. I don't expect that any of you know, right? But in 2000, that was an insane question, right? Today, I don't think anybody says anymore that's an insane question, right? Or let's take something that's a little bit less esoteric, but for those of us who keep kosher, still important, right? Lab-grown meat. Kosher or not kosher, right? And if kosher, right, the OU just gave a hectare to lab-grown chicken. But it's meat, but it's inflation, okay? Which in my opinion is both wrong and disappointing, okay? Because having grown up not kosher, I miss chicken parmesan, right? And it would be nice if they certified it as far, right? Or if we got lab-grown beef, and we could have cheeseburgers, right?
But hasn't that lab grown meat out of the free movements previously that lab grown? Because the US said last year that the conservative code was the most strict on having lab grown meat actually be eaten.
Right, you are correct that the law committee passed a Shuva that lab-grown meat is slated, okay? But first of all, it's a Shuva from the law committee. It's not a standard of rabbinic practice, right? So I'm free to disagree, right? And I'm free to teach my congregation, this is what the law committee says, this is why they're wrong, okay? Now, again, I'm not saying that they're wrong because it's been a while, but I have to say that I found that argument not particularly convincing because it was essentially based on Amichai, right? That, all right, I'm gonna talk about Amichai briefly and then we'll go on, okay? So Amichai means you look like you're committing a sin, okay? But you look like you're committing a sin in a way that might like really mislead people and cause them to sin. Like, no, I'll give you an example, okay? What?
Chicken argument for people don't, like, meat's okay and meat's okay.
Right, the original, right, I mean, chicken is really biblically hard, right? Because there's no way that you're gonna wind up cooking the chicken in its mother's milk, right? And so the rabbis ruled chicken is not actually plated, but is treated as plated because people might otherwise see you, they might say, oh, this is chicken, when it's really beef.
Right.
Not likely. I mean, they could say, oh, this is turkey when it's really veal, which actually could absolutely happen, except that turkey was not known to the rabbis at the time because it's a new world word, right? But Morris Ayin is exactly that, right? So, like, I'm driving somewhere. What?
Beyond burger, my mother and my wife say should not be considered bar.
Right, okay, so beyond burger, but like, you shouldn't wear a kippah into McDonald's to go to the bathroom or to get a cup of coffee, because somebody will say, I saw this Jew in McDonald's wearing a kippah, and I always thought McDonald's was trick. But obviously it's kosher, so I'll start eating in McDonald's now, right? So that, anybody who does that is actually an idiot and probably, right, is exempt, but, so that's the fear, right? It's Mari Ayin that, somebody will see me eating my, my robo steak, or or like Michael said, his wife and his mother think Beyond Burger should be treated as plated, which, with all due respect, is ridiculous, okay? But that was the argument, for example, when hard creamers came out, right? That people will, so originally, the rule was, if you're using a hard creamer, keep the container of coffee rich, don't put the coffee rich into your little creamer thing. What are they called? Creamer. What? Right, creamer, right? Put the container of coffee rich on the table so everybody will know. Or, if you're having a fleishig meal and serving margarine for the rolls, again, don't put it in a butter dish. Put it out with the wrapper so that everybody will know it's margarine and not butter. Okay, and that may have been necessary in the 40s and 50s when the existence of hard margarine and hard creamers was not, nobody followed that. Right? Nobody, I mean, literally no one, right? Because we all know that they exist, right? So at a certain point, everybody's going to know that Beyond Burgers exist, right? And so you can have Beyond Cheeseburgers, right? And eventually, everybody's going to know that lab-grown meat exists. And to me, the argument of Mari Ayin is not really sufficient. I mean, especially with this chicken, right? Because it's not even, it's grown from cells taken from, stem cells taken from eggs, not even from chickens, right? So for sure, it absolutely should be hard, right? And the only reason it's not hard is Mari Ayin. Right now with beef, it's a little bit more complicated because, look, believe me, I am not a scientist, right? But I believe that the original matter that is then grown into this meat is taken from a cow right? Because cows don't have eggs, or things. Anyway, it's been an interesting discussion, not in the direction that I thought it would be. But what?
Yehuda, Amichai, and cow eggs.
Yehuda, Amichai, and cow. That's what. Okay. So we will not do the Kaddish before Musaf, because that's connected to the Torah service. So we will turn